7 weeks ago, a Chief Justice's dismissive jibe, calling unemployed young Indians cockroaches and parasites, became the name of a movement. A movement that just forced a union minister to resign. In between, a historic 26-day hunger strike led by Indian GenZs against a compromised medical entrance examination. A mixture of peaceful protests, memes, sporadic violence, and a police crackdown on teenagers that fueled the anger of a large part of the nation. And finally, a government that blinked in a way it hadn't in the last 12 years. Meanwhile, in just the last week, the government too has moved fast. An amendment to the anti-paper leak law with jail terms up to 10 years and fast-track courts in every state, and a new task force to overhaul the exam system. However, the government had announced deep reforms just 2 years ago after the first big leak at NEET, or the National Eligibility Cum Entrance Test. So the questions that come at us are, how did dissent on social media spill over so effectively into the streets, and what does it say about youth agency? Is weaponizing ridicule and self-deprecation a sustainable form of dissent in the physical space, especially when the means are the ends, sans any organization or clear political underpinnings? What does one reform announcement after another over the last 2 years mean? How much of the 2024 reforms have actually been implemented? Is punitive action effective without structural reforms? Is Nandan Nilekani's task force carrying forward the mandate of the 2024 Radhakrishnan committee or introducing fresh ones? Listen on. It's Tuesday, the 28th of July. I'm Anirban Chowdhury. This is the Morning Brief. My first guests are Dr Anindya Kundu and Dr Usha Raman. Anindya is a sociologist and associate professor at Florida International University. Dr Raman is a former professor, Dept of Communication at the University of Hyderabad. First, Anindya. Hi Anindya, very warm welcome to the Morning Brief.
Hi Anirban, thank you for the invitation.
So your work focuses on student agency. Tell me, what do you think turns youthful frustration into collective action, which is sustainable? What I basically mean is online dissent that spills over to the physical space.
Sure. I think that's a great question. You already know that I'm an American Indian professor and scholar. I study student agency. I'm an expert of the sociology of education and specifically how people and communities create change. And so my lens on what is happening in Jantar Mantar and beyond is about understanding why youth and students are concluding that public protest is one of the few tools they have left. Often it is the outcome of months, weeks, years of frustration. And that's, I think, what we're seeing here. And so social media, it allows young people a space, a platform to share their grievances. But what's happening in recent events and when we see, organized protests is that social media allows people to understand that their personal frustrations are part of a greater shared experience, that they're scratching the surface of something that is more structural and systemic. And so that's what I see here, is that it's not a disorganized, trendy or feel-good outcome. It's a collective mobilizing of channeling pain, anguish, and systemic violence or neglect.
So do you think social media has expanded youth or young people's political agency?
Yes, certainly. What it's doing is connecting young people from all wakes of life. One of the strengths of a large democratic country like India is its diversity. But as we've seen in the last few generations, often people are focusing so much on what makes them different, what divides them from their political beliefs to their religion to their class. Young people are quick to sort of have each other's back and again realize that they have more in common than they have different. And so sometimes that just starts at the level of, this is something I'm interested in, my passions, my music, my sports interests. But when there's something political happening that is affecting young people's day-to-day experience, that's a place they go to talk about their sort of grievances. And it quickly can turn an individual challenge or injustice into collective action. And again, I would say that protesters are not out in the streets because they're selfish young people. They could be doing more fun and productive things with their time, like, being with their friends or engaging in social media. But when they take to the streets, it's because there's something that they are actively hoping to change. And it's not just something we're seeing in India, but this is something we're seeing in across the world, the modern conditions. And social media is a collectivizing place where they can unite. But then the next step often seems to be to take to the streets and protest.
How sustainable do you think are these movements in the physical space?
So I would say a more important question is not necessarily about the sustainability of the social movement, but whether we are seeing something that has the ability to change institutions or at least the public conversation. And I think that's certainly what's happening right now because, I'm someone who lives in Miami, Florida in the United States. I've been paying attention to this event. People all over the world are watching. So the protest, as we've talked about, can become a little bit disorganized. But what we are seeing that is organized is that young people are tired of the rampant socioeconomic polarization, the systemic injustice that they are seeing. Of course, they're young people, they're Gen Z. You're going to see them wear costumes. You're going to see them sing songs. But joy is an act of resistance. Being able to create a farce out of the situation goes to show how silly the situation can be. It's a pretty brilliant tactic. And it's not one that we are seeing here for the first time. Young people, especially students, are the ones who have created broad-scale social change throughout world history when it has mattered the most. We also have not been good about teaching young people civic history, right? So I'll just say in the United States, as an example, one thing that we're seeing in this current political climate is the whitewashing of history. We are overlooking deeply painful systemic oppression, the colonization of the United States, the genocide of the indigenous Americans, who we can now call Native Americans here, making it seem that the outcomes and the progress we are experiencing and living through right now happen naturally. But it never happens naturally. It's always messy, takes a lot of deliberate effort. It's not always sustained, but there is a sustained passion, I think. And if more of us, your generation, my generation, and our older generation were quick to think about why is this happening? How might we support the youth, at least in the conversations we're having, that might help to have it be a little less messy, have it be a little bit more organized. And I will say, it seems pretty sustainable because so many of the CJP demands have been met. It's been successful. What's to come, we shall see, but the young people are in the driver's seat.
Thank you so much, Anindya.
My pleasure.
Next up, Dr. Raman. Hi, Dr. Raman. Very warm welcome to the Morning Brief.
Hi, Anirban. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure, Dr. Raman. So when you look at the movement in retrospect, how do you see it from the lens of technology and communications? The fact that the biggest weapons of the protesters, the young protesters, were actually phone cameras and memes, which is sort of a form of ridicule or satire, if I may.
Well, I think in some ways it's just a continuation, right, of the way discourse has sort of unfolded on the internet. So I don't think for them life is independent of these forms of communication. So I think they have grown into public discourse through these modes. So I think it's only natural that the phone and all its affordances, the cameras, the videos, the platforms, whether it's Instagram or other homegrown sort of video platforms, that they have been the mode of choice for this generation. And in terms of humor, I think, memes have, again, become not just shorthand, but almost stand-in for bigger ideas. The brevity, the fact that they are multi-layered, the fact that they can hold up subtext, that they can be repurposed and shared in multiple ways. So I think all of these things make both the phone and the meme as a form that encodes both serious messages folded into humor. So I think, I think it's just a natural part of our age, so to speak.
How do you see the fact that virality and content creation almost dictated the tone of a movement?
Well, I think, this has been a concern, right? But I think it's a concern for people who expect political discourse to take a certain path, to take both a certain path and a certain form, both in terms of the speed of dispersal and the form of dispersal. I think we've dismissed that in a way as being non-serious. But then when you think about it from the other side, that is when you think about it from the side of the young people who were actually using these tools, I think these are normal technologies, right? They're not exceptional technologies. So I think this is perhaps the way a large part of political discourse is going to operate. But whether it is going to sustain in a way that actually leads to systemic change, to changing the terms of engagement in a democracy, I think that we still have to see, right? What is uncertain about all of this is that the people in power are people who are in some ways still uncomfortable with these modes. And the people who are seeking to transform power are those who are completely comfortable with these modes. And I think many of us on the other side of the generational divide may have dismissed it too easily and as something trivial, as something non-serious. And we're seeing that that is perhaps not the right attitude to take. And I think we need to find ways of encouraging this sort of awakened political consciousness in more constructive ways. I'm hopeful, but also I'm not jumping to any conclusions here.
So you mentioned political discourse, but I felt the movement was distinctive in the sense that a large part of it had no political underpinnings, actually. In fact, it went to a point where the identities were largely sort of borrowed from the virtual world. Is that not something that sort of worries you?
Well, I think, what is politics? I mean, politics is not only party politics, right? Or ideological warfare, let's say. It's also a struggle to gain power and visibility in ways other than through processes. The movement is political in that it seeks to use a certain form of power to go forward, right? To gain acceptance of an agenda or to get people to change their minds. And you use the word identity, and I think there's been a lot of commentary about what is the identity of this movement, and because it has not played to the usual politics that we've been used to, which draws on a certain kind of identity, right? So either it is caste-based or religion-based or, some kind of constituency-based identity. So I think this protest has been different in that it has not called out those identities, even though those identities were very present in the body of the movement. But on the other hand, you also mentioned virtual identities. I feel like, the virtual identity is as real as the away from the keyboard or the what we might call the material identity, right? So I think it's not divorced from the offline identity. And I agree that it's possible to mask and be somewhat anonymous online, but I think more and more there is a sense that you cannot be completely anonymous online, right? Because the kind of surveillance that exists almost makes it necessary for us to assume that you're going to be tracked in some way, unless you're, of course, part of the deep web. So I think the notion of virtual identity, as might have thought about it 20 years ago, no longer is the case today. So I think the ways in which people are engaging online are as real as those who come out onto the street to protest.
Got it. Okay, now straight question is, do you think the state's control over voices on the internet is loosening, particularly when they spill out onto the streets? I mean, the so-called IT cell narratives really didn't work this time.
Well, I think it's a question of scale and also the fact that the government didn't anticipate the virality of this protest. And governments and those who have authority and power are very quick to regain power or to reclaim power. So I would say for now, yeah, in this round, perhaps the protesters won against the surveillance machinery. And it also exposed that the government is not as sure-footed about IT surveillance as we had thought, which brings in some hope. But I would also hesitate to be too optimistic about that, because we've seen that governments are able to, people who want to claim power have been able to use technology to do that.
Right. You mentioned this round. Do you see more rounds? Do you see more such, if I may use the word, uprisings happening?
I mean, I think one of the things that has happened is that it's definitely showed us that it is possible to demand and get some sort of change. I think what is yet not clear is whether that change is going to be really sustainable. In terms of other uprisings, I think definitely there will be some mirror effect of this, and also a sense that it is possible. I'm hopeful. But again, history has shown us that it's not that simple. Like the 60s saw a wave of protests in the US, and look where the US is now. So it's probably cyclical in that sense.
Dr. Raman, thank you so much.
Okay, great. Yeah.
Now, over the past decade, India has witnessed dozens of major paper leaks, but none shook public confidence quite like NEET UG 2024. A paper leak from an exam taken by more than 24 lakh students triggered nationwide protests, a CBI probe, a Supreme Court scrutiny, and a complete rethink of how India conducts its most important public examinations. In response, the government constituted the K. Radhakrishnan Committee, which produced over 100 recommendations aimed at modernizing the National Testing Agency, which is the body conducting these exams. The recommendations range from strengthening governance and reducing dependence on outsourced staff to improving question paper security, technology, transparency, and accountability. In fact, in an affidavit filed before the Supreme Court in May this year, Dr. Radhakrishnan said a majority of the committee's 101 recommendations had either been implemented or were under active execution, with several reforms already operational. But several deeper institutional reforms remain unfinished. More on that in a bit. Meanwhile, the government has now gone a step further. Amendments to the Public Examinations Prevention of Unfair Means Act sharply raise punishments, taking prison terms up to 10 years and fines up to 10 crore rupees for organized exam fraud. The government has also mandated time-bound investigations and created a fast-track court to prosecute offenders. Alongside this, Prime Minister Narendra Modi has announced a new high-powered task force led by Nandan Nilekani, the architect of Aadhaar, to shape the next phase of examination reforms. So, do these three developments, the Radhakrishnan Committee, tougher anti-cheating laws, and the Nilekani Task Force, form one coherent reform strategy, or are they just three separate responses to the same crisis? My next guest is my colleague Anubhuti Vishnoi, who has closely tracked the government's examination reform agenda. Hi Anubhuti, warm welcome to the Morning Brief.
Thank you so much for having me here, Anirban.
We are talking about the NEET reforms after this whole 26-day protest. Now the government has been quick to announce some reforms. But let me take you back to 2024, when the first major NEET leak happened, and the reforms that were announced then under the Radhakrishnan Committee. Tell me about those reforms and how much of that has been implemented.
Well, a whole lot of recommendations are actually made, and it was quite ambitious, I'd say. Series of recommendations mainly focused on overhauling the National Testing Agency and many of its processes. For one, they had said that any exam which has more than 2 lakh students appearing for it should be in a multi-session testing format spread over days, instead of just like a one-day pen and paper exam, which the NEET UG is currently. It said, it has to be spread over many days, has to shift to computer-based testing. You must set up standardized testing centers, thousands of them across the country. even mobile testing centers, like in a van, where you can go to a remote area and test students there, like a digital format of the exam. Also bringing in biometrics, AI, Aadhaar for authentication, encrypted question papers with, delivered on confidential servers at testing centers, high-speed printers everywhere at testing centers. So, that you don't have to carry a printed test paper from one location to the other in the process, rendering it vulnerable to leaks. So there were a whole series of recommendations, really. But I'd say if I look at now, 2 years later, most of still stays in the realm of discussion. Very few have actually made it on ground. Even the basic requirement of an efficient CCTV system at exam centers, that has been challenging. So there are serious infrastructural challenges. In 2025, after this high-level committee recommended oversight of central institutes at exam centers, this came to the fore very clearly. So you got central institutes like IITs, Indian Institute of Science, NITs, and their top professors were monitoring the NEET UG centers remotely last year. I'm talking about 2025 NEET UG. But what they found is deeply worrying. I'll just give you examples like an IIT Madras, which was monitoring the conduct of exams at Tamil Nadu's 30 odd exam centers. It said no camera feed was available in at least 9 centers. Nearly 60 exam rooms, strong room cameras. There was no video feed. So how are you going to monitor the conduct of the exam, leak-free conduct of the exam? ISC Bangalore, it said at many centers, CCTVs were not working. There was lack of coverage at strong rooms, frisking areas. The same was the case in Punjab and NITTR, Chandigarh, which was monitoring all Punjab exam centers. It said there was no CCTV cameras working in 10 centers, less than 50% CCTV cameras working at one center during exam time. So I'm just using the example of the CCTV to show, the kind of challenge we are talking about when you are holding an exam of this scale, and how far we are from being able to deliver it the way the Radhakrishnan panel envisaged, or the way it is desirable to do so. So, that is one thing. But the bigger one, shifting the NEET UG to a computer-based testing one, as far as we know, it is still a matter of debate and discussion between the
Right.
National Testing Authority, the Education Ministry, and the Health Ministry. There is no clear timeline. There is hardly any consensus on how to go forward, especially because of these kind of huge logistical infrastructure challenges. How will you do it over days? Do you have the pool of people to create so many question papers which can be served on digital mode? Do you have that kind of faculty? All those are very, very big gaps. So I would say the bulk of recommendations are yet to be implemented. Some parts, in bits and part, it has been done. But for it to come into effect, a much more a mission mode implementation scheme is needed.
And yet, I think in an affidavit in May to the Supreme Court, the committee said that most of the implementation has been done. Am I right?
Yes, but as I try to detail here, how far we are still from there. If you leave out CBT mode and testing centers, maybe you'll count them as 1-2 recommendations, but they are the core recommendations. Without that, you can't really deliver a test which can be leak-proof.
Got it. Anubhuti, how do you look at the recent announcements from the government, particularly the fast-track courts and the amendments to the Public Examinations Prevention of Unfair Means Act to increase the punitive bits of the reforms? And these are announced even as the structural reforms have not been properly implemented. How do you look at this?
So, Anirban, all these issues you mentioned, I mean, whether we look at the fast track courts or the amendment to the act, they're building on already what was done in the aftermath of the 2024 leak case. That is when this particular act came into play. It is being amended 2 years down the line. You are only increasing penal provision, right? And fast track courts. So you will punish them faster. But I think it doesn't even reach that stage as yet. If we look at the 2024 version of the act, very poor prosecution records are there under the act so far. The larger issue is implementation of the existing reform and overhaul recommendations made by the Radhakrishnan panel, and before that actually by many committees. It's not really an unknown area to the Education Ministry or anybody who's involved in the conduct of these tests. Everybody is well aware of these issues for years and years, if I may say so. In fact, the NTA was created precisely for this purpose, to try and cut down leaks, to try and create a streamlined entrance exam conducting body. The ministry and the government, the center has been very well aware of all these issues. But look at how NTA was managed over the last 2-3 years. So when the 2024 leak happened, the then incumbent DG, who had also only joined recently actually, Subodh Kumar Singh was suddenly removed amid the whole leak fiasco. And another person, the chairman and MD of ITPO, then he was given additional charge of the agency soon after. Now, the agency, the top entrance exam conducting agency, went on with this temporary arrangement of additional charge right until October 2025, which is again just for 5 months away from the next NEET exam of 2025. And then in October 2025, another IS officer, Mr. Rajesh Lakhani, is brought in to steer the ship. Now, about days ahead of NEET 2026, you had a third person coming in. Abhishek Singh was made under the charge of the NTA. So in less than 2 years, you've got a third person at the helm. So in terms of institutional accountability, continuity, stability, I would say this certainly impacted the way NTA was being managed, NTA's own manpower work amid a series of very, very major recommendations to overhaul the whole entrance examinations. So the problem here is simply implementation. So while it's very welcome, all these new ideas and also the new task force which has been set up, I think it's as good as this report or task force or recommendations will be as good as the level of implementation that is effective after them.
Tell me about the task force. Is it in charge of implementing what has been recommended but not fulfilled yet, or is it a separate set of initiatives that it will bring forth?
Well, I think it's very early to say. It's only announced on Sunday. And while you've got a good star cast in the task force, it's headed by Nandan Nilekani, of course, who's worked very closely on several other important issues and matters. So the whole idea here is that you have to ensure that the public examination system becomes more secure, transparent, more technology driven, and how you can check malpractices. We will have to wait and watch what it does and how seriously, as I'll keep underlining, how seriously are the recommendations implemented.
Got it. Still, if I were to ask you in the short term, in the next few months, what do you see happening? People are talking of a cabinet reshuffle where you will get a new education minister. I mean, Prahlad Joshi has been given an additional charge, but maybe there will be a larger reshuffle and a new minister. But what else do you see happening?
Well, who is the minister or not, I don't think is the moot question here. You have to address some systemic issues with the entire education sector. I'd say that. I think it's quite clear that there is a lot of public angst and especially youth distress around the issue of entrance exams. And in fact, it's not only this entrance exam. You look at the public examination system across states. There are leaks all the time. So there is a huge trust deficit which is building up because of the failure of the state to deliver exams which offer the only route for many for social and economic mobility. And, I'd like to point out why this is such a pain point. Now, look at NEET UG. You have about 22.8 lakh candidates who competed for how many seats? 1.36 lakh seats. And then you look at JEE. 1.5 million students apply for the JEE Main annually, and you're competing for just about 63,000 seats. I can go on and on. The common law admission test, you have barely 4,000 seats, nearly a lakh students appearing for it. So it's the larger demand and supply issue, which also leads to leaks. So similarly now for university admissions, now you have the CUET. Look at the 2026 figures, about 15.6 lakh students are competing for roughly 3 lakh undergraduate seats. So look at the applicant to seat ratio, 5:1. But top institutes, much higher competition, very few places. So it's a larger problem in the education system. So in school, your secondary education dropout is massive, about 50%. Also, let me tell you, government's own data says that about 73% of India's workforce is at basic level of education. About 11% an advanced level of education who land good jobs and who have a good future and career ahead. So you have this huge segment of people, the 73% people fighting hard to be able to get through these competitive spaces with very little level of education and access to learning material or right guidance and everything. Why will you not find them at sites of protest then? Because, how is it a fair and equitable system? It is the state unable to, with all its good intentions or with the policy pronouncements or even with the new national education policy, you're not able to address these key concerns. And mission mode implementation apart, you also need massive funding in the education sector. We are nowhere near the 6% of the GDP situation. We are at middling 2 to 3%. And you cannot, with such a young population, compromise on this front, because this is the only way when we talk about the demographic dividend, etc. You can achieve that. Otherwise, it's going to be a liability.
Thanks, Anubhuti, for joining us.
Thank you so much. Was an engaging discussion as always.
So, this movement did something that had become rare in the last decade, holding a lawmaker accountable and leading to his ouster. But is that enough, and will it sustain? Already, there's news about social media accounts of several protesters suspended and a few arrests. The government has meanwhile announced quick reforms, but we have been there before. Will they bring real change? So the real question isn't whether the cockroaches won this round. It's whether this time reform reaches students before another movement has to force it again. That's it for today. You were listening to this episode on The Morning Brief. It was produced by me, sound designed by Indranil Bhattacharjee. Keep listening to The Morning Brief and our other podcasts, including Corner Office Conversation, on your favorite listening platform. Stay tuned.